We don't know what we're doing, world. We're trying it. We're pressing buttons. We got Michael Phelan here. Michael, we figured out the speakers. We're doing it. Beers with Max. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for not operating too much heavy machinery. Michael, what are we talking about today? We had a fun talk. We used words like comically delusional and bad to non-existent. I think we're talking about getting meetings. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, the most important thing for most B2B companies is that first discovery meeting. It tends to generate opportunities. It's kind of what I call the central most important metric in the pipeline. And it's actually down about 30% from last year, and it's actually trending even more down in 2005. So we're going to talk about why that is, and why people are not addressing it in a more serious way. I've seen several sales kickoff meetings and not even a mention of addressing the fact that we're having less meetings with customers, less deep interaction and information sharing. Why is that, and what do we need to do to change that in 2025?
Yeah, that's my question. Like, what's the conspiracy theory here? Because, like, I live in agency world. I knew 2023 was tough. 21 and 22 seemed like everyone had a lifeline. It was sort of like, okay, it's not going to be crazy. 23, 24, real bad news. It probably starts, like you're saying, right at the tip of the pipeline. Why do you feel like meetings are down just across the board?
Well, there's several factors. I mean, the MQL SQL conversion to meetings is down about 50% over the past 5 years or so. So we're generating leads. Perhaps we're generating even more leads, but those leads are not converting to meetings. That's partially they weren't designed to convert to meetings, and partially there isn't a good sales strategy to convert them to meetings. But also, things have changed with buyers. Buyers are more strategic on who they want to meet with. Buyers are less inclined to take random calls. Senior management don't want all their buyers and executives spending all their time with vendors. They want it to be a strategic initiative that they want to solve for. It's both changes on the marketing side and the conversion side, and also changes on the buyer side. But the good news is there's some things that can be done to solve this.
Now, before we get into it, in my mind, all meetings are created equal. Meaning, if you want to drive revenue for your service company, like Agency World in my case, meetings with net new clients can turn into sales just as much as meetings with existing clients and additional decision makers, budget holding decision makers. And we got into that the other day of like helping, yes, the sales team get new meetings, but not losing sight of that, of playing offense and recognizing that all the same challenges and all the same tactics when used with existing clients can improve retention, can lead to upsell opportunities. And I've been a broken record about this, but I just, if sales is underprepared, then the service side of these businesses is woefully inept.
No, you're totally right on that, and the land and expand motion, sometimes called customer success, sometimes sales engineering, sometimes client services. Those
Account
folks,
management, throw that
yeah,
in
account
there.
management. Those folks actually have a much greater opportunity to prospect into those accounts, because at least they've got some business with the account. They're already an established vendor. They've already been through the hurdles. So those people need more help than ever. And actually, those people are less qualified in terms of prospecting, less experienced in terms of prospecting. Many of them tend to be more program managers, standing up a program, implementing and executing it, which is important, but they tend to be very weak on or untrained on prospecting. And the other thing is there's a level of arrogance up top that says, we already have the AT&T account, for example. And they may have one division of one part of one city, and maybe they've got less than one eighth of 1% of the revenue opportunity, but they're promoting the fact that they've got that account and they've got relationships and they don't need any help to develop that account. I would say actually they do need help. They need a strategy to develop the account. So I see the world of what I would call the more innovative, creative, value-added prospecting should be applied both to net new logo and to land and expand with current customers equally.
Yeah. And then how did you get into this? I mean, I'm going to be taking notes about getting these meetings, but like what's the 30-second story on how you got here?
It's interesting, I formed Go to Market Pros about 13 years ago. I focus on kind of helping companies with go to market strategies in the US or coming into the US. And what I increasingly heard from companies is they're really frustrated that they can't get high quality meetings with their target either ABM accounts or their target prospect accounts. And executives are very heavily tasked with that. The board want to know, who's our top 100 prospects and where are we? It has an impact on valuation when you can get some of these top prospects into your company. So they just find it harder and harder. And I have one CEO that said to me, we don't have meetings with any of our top 100 prospects in the next 30 days. And he said there's something wrong. We're not doing things the right way. We need to change. So I think that the focus on that, even intent data will tell you maybe that someone's shopping at the account. Might not tell you who's shopping, but it tells you that somebody's shopping in some location. And how do you take that indication of potential demand? It may be demand or it may be just checking out things, but how do you take that and convert it to something that's a meeting in an intelligent way?
And what's the tip of the spear for your point of view?
The
Because we
tip
can
is
we can break it down, but I'm sure you've got a sharpened like, hey, here's the issue.
And I think what it is there's no tip of the spear for most companies that are reaching out to B2B buyers. They don't have enough value in their reach out in a programmatic way. All the talk about personalization, buyers don't care what you know about them. They care what you know about the problem that they're working on, not the problem but the jobs to be done. So the tip of the spear is focus on helping the buyer do a better job. Showcase that you understand the job they're doing. What is the inputs? What's the process that they go through? What are the outputs? But more importantly, show the buyer that they're not doing the job as well as their best in class peers. So if you're talking to Target is fascinated on advanced marketing personalization. The board is constantly asking Target, why are we ranked number 14 in the world on advanced marketing personalization? Who are the top 5 companies doing it much better than us? Why are they doing it better? And how do we bridge that performance gap? So Target will focus only on, if you reach out to them, they're only interested in 4 or 5 retailers. Everything else couldn't care less. They don't care about your banking reference. They don't care about your healthcare company. What they care about is that you've studied Sephora, who happens to be the best in the world at what they do in advanced marketing personalization, that you studied Target, and that you can have an intelligent conversation with Target about what they're not doing, where they're leaving money on the table, where their process is inefficient, where they're consuming too much input, or not getting enough output. And when you approach buyers based on truly understanding and helping them do a better job in the direction of their best in class peers and identifying performance gaps, they'll meet with you every single time. So the problem is they don't have a point in the spear. They don't have something of real value and interest to the buyer. They just want a demo. And they think that if they find out that you're into horse polo and they watched a horse polo competition one time, that all of a sudden the buyer will take a half an hour of their precious time and watch your demo. So I think a lot of the sales training companies are really being headed in the wrong direction. They've been teaching the wrong stuff. They've been telling BDOs, you need to build a relationship with your buyer. Wrong. Buyer couldn't care less about having a relationship with a BDR. A BDR needs to add value, show unique insights, and help a company do the job better. And if they do that, they'll get the meeting. So I think sales training could completely go away as far as I'm concerned, and this could be replaced by a buyer value exchange and interaction, which is where it needs to go.
So I'm hearing part of it is actually gathering the intelligence. the competitive data, the stuff that they want to see. But then there requires some packaging. You can't just say, "Hey, meet me on the corner of Fifth and West, and we'll exchange the data." And I know you've got some creative ideas around that. So what are some popular ways to say, "Hey, here's is it a workshop? Is it an executive briefing?" Just to call out some of the things I've been hearing for years. How do we package up this stuff and make it attractive for buyers to show up and start talking?
So one of the methodologies that I do is what's called a moderated best practices meeting. And because buyers have tuned off of BDRs and they've tuned off of AI spam, and there's just so many, they've just been hit with so many messages. So they're ignoring anything that's coming from sales, basically. So you have to kind of come at them from a different perspective. On the other hand, they're fascinated by research, by best practices, and by analysts, people who can really help them understand their industry, the job they're doing, help them understand that comparison. So I reach out, I'll work with a client and they'll say, "Hey, here's my top 200 prospects." I'll reach out and set up best practices meetings with them. I'll say, "I'll give you a stipend for taking the call. You share how you're doing the
What
job."
does that mean?
Like a fee. I'll give you, say, a
Oh, okay.
research
Yeah,
stipend.
I'll
So
pay you. All right.
normally $100 to $250 depending on level, or we give the money to your charity. So we bring them into that, and then when they come on the call, we introduce them to the sponsor of the study, who's really sales, but they're listening to me interview them for 15 minutes. I interview the buyer with them. How are you doing the job today? What are your inputs? What's your process? What are your outputs? Are you happy with that process? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What technologies do you use? What would you like to do that you can't do? Who's best in class in your industry doing this job and why? And then on the back half of the call, then that particular vendor can share very specific examples of challenges the buyer's expressing and how they've solved those challenges. So the sales is made to listen for 15 minutes. The buyer appreciates the fact that they're treated as an expert, and that interaction between the sales and the buyer becomes much more meaningful because it's in the context of helping the buyer do a better job. And at some stage, the buyer said, "Well, tell me about your company. What do you do, and how can you help me bridge that gap?" And then we package up all the insights from that and bring it to market as content, and it performs better than any other content. So for one of my clients in Canada, Exchange Solutions, they couldn't get into any one of the top 100 retailers. This methodology got them into 95 of the top 100 retailers. And now their sales team, and they didn't do any research ahead of time. To your point, they didn't study anything. They didn't collect any data. They just had meetings with 95 of the top buyers. And through that process, they learned everything they needed to learn, and we packaged that up into marketing. So they didn't spend any money on formal research, but they got the insights directly from the buyers, and then their sales team were able to leverage that when they reached out and said, if they're reaching out, say for example, to a Macy's, right? They were able to leverage the fact that they had conversation with Beals, a very relevant. And it's like, "Hey, I've just had an interview with," and they're able to leverage that data because it's not confidential. It's not like it's my client's data. I paid somebody for research, and I'm able to leverage that research. So there's nothing to stop them from communicating to Macy's, in this case, what they've learned from Beals. And there's nothing to stop the opposite way around. So this is information that's being shared with the industry, and in essence helps everybody in the industry do a better job. And we're not asking for secret sauce. Sometimes this is things like, how's your forecasting process? How's your advanced marketing personalization process? They're all struggling with the same things, and they want to learn from each other. And that's why people flock to Gartner, and they flock to all these companies and spend a fortune with them. However, Gartner doesn't provide this kind of, if you talk to a Gartner analyst, none of them will say, "I've met with the top 95 of the top 100 retailers in the last 3 weeks." None of them have done that. A lot of times they've got older data. It's not exactly what you want, or the analyst is not specialized in the problem you're solving. So you need to become the analyst for their industry. And if you do, you'll get tremendous respect from them.
Well, and even seeing how how they're reacting to certain political changes, seasonality, like, hey, what are you doing in Q4 as a new president enters the White House to address blah 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 blah. So,
True.
yeah, there is a gap in that formal research. Listening to you talk about this, I was just talking with an agency who has a foot in the door with Google, cannot for the life of them get meetings with other um, same level departments, department heads at the other departments at Google. I mean, this sounds like the perfect internal study to do as well, because I have to imagine those department heads are curious about what their counterparts are struggling with and prioritizing. Have you done it? Like, is it basically the same tactic within larger organizations to help foster communication between people that don't typically communicate?
Yes, yes. In fact, this can be done very effectively in a land and expand motion. So, you get these big companies like Google, they can learn as much from their internal peers as from their external peers. A lot of times they don't even know who their internal peers are. So let's say you're an agency that's doing a work on, maybe it's search engine optimization, whatever it may be. You're doing a specific thing for Google on that, or whatever you're hired to do, whatever job you're hired to make better for Google, right? And then what you do is you find out, who are the other 20 departments and use cases that are doing this type of work. And you set up a meeting with your sponsor leading that meeting and saying we're gonna gather up the best practices of how Google is approaching this across 20 different departments. We're going to share what we've learned from this use case, and we've actually studied a couple of other companies that are doing something similar, and we're going to share some external practices. Every one of those departments will join. Now you're in a leadership position, helping the organization better understand the job, and all of a sudden now these departments are going to start to compare themselves, but they're also going to learn from the case study you've done, and out of that would come a ton of new opportunities for the agency. Hey, we're pretty good at doing this, but we're not so good at doing that. Can you help us with that? So the agency is in a mode where you're actually going to get a lot of opportunities, and you're in a leadership mode, and you're really helping the company as this thing from, hey, can you get me a demo? Or can you make an introduction so I can get a demo? It's a much more sophisticated approach, and it's a much more buyer-centric, friendly approach. And they'll really appreciate that. And if you do this enough, you become the analyst on that job. You become the person who knows how to do the job, how to set it up, and can bring the best practices. I learned this first when I was on a buying team. It was one of my clients in Boston, Iron Mountain, and we were looking at bringing in an e-commerce solution for their SMB market. And the very first question is anybody in our industry doing e-commerce for the SMB segment? And if they are, what platform are they using? Nobody had an answer to that on the team, which was interesting. And they asked all the vendors that came, hey, I don't care about your banking references. I want companies just like me, providing services like me, who are servicing the SMB market. And I want to know if they're providing kind of simple to use e-commerce solutions for SMB. None of the vendors knew that. And not only that, none of the vendors took the action to find out that. So when I'm bidding on that contract, if any of them had gone out, studied 4 or 5 even SMB companies, or companies that had gone from enterprise down to SMB, or their competitors, and come back, they probably would have got the business. So think about what are the natural questions buying teams are asking. What is the information they don't have? How can you provide them with insights on their business, insights on the jobs to be done, to help them be a better buyer? So if you start off helping them be a better buyer, they will respect you. They may not buy today, but they'll buy tomorrow, and they'll reach back to you when you do this kind of work. They'll remember you. You're not just a person that did a demo. You're a person that actually is studying the jobs to be done, cares about that, and show genuine empathy. Don't rush to sale. Part of this methodology is you nearly want to be asked, how can you help us? Which is really the way consulting works. How can you help us? And then you come to the table. But provide value and insights first, and sell second, as distinct from the opposite, demo first, sell immediately, which is the way a lot of companies are doing it today.
So how is the like that? I think is the challenge. It's so ingrained, and I see this identity crisis. I mean, I see sales and consulting as the exact same thing. And I loved your point earlier about we're not providing enough value in the conversation. Nobody cares about the product right now.
Hmm.
They don't know what your product is, so you have to come with something that is valuable. And you just rattled off the top questions that are valuable, that would add value to buyers. But how is this? I'm curious as to how this is being received and by who at your clients for these folks that are having trouble getting meetings. Are they resistant to this? Is that a shock? Is it like, hey, that's not what we do? Because uh, it's pretty straightforward, and there's a heck of a lot of examples of it working. So that's my question: is how receptive
Yeah,
are
I mean, I
people?
do have a lot of case studies and client references, probably 30 different, so there's a lot of evidence that it will work. I think the resistance you might find on some, and I have about 30 different methodologies that I go through my workshop. The moderated prospect is one of them. Companies can choose from a lot of them. But I think there's a couple of things. One is there's a resistance to hire anybody externally. They think and want that they have all the capabilities internally, and they also think that the capabilities internally are underperforming. So they want to go back and force those guys. You better be generating more meetings. You're not generating more meetings. We've given you sales enablement. You have marketing. You have all these platforms. Just do it, right? So there's a little bit of that, and I call it where the CEO, CRO, CMO comes down to the team, berates them for not having enough pipeline, berates them for not having enough conversion, and the people are on stationary bikes, and they're like, "Hey, we can pedal faster, but we're not going to move forward because we're on a stationary bike." So there's a reluctance to accept that they don't have a real biz dev strategy. They don't have a good marketing engagement strategy. The prospects are not engaging with them. The ones that it works with, they're a little bit more humble. They admit the fact that there's challenges. They accept those numbers. And also, I see a lot of excuses. One of the biggest excuses you'll hear right now is, well, they're not meeting with us because they're doing their own buyer journey. And they're going to be 80% of the way through the buyer journey by the time they reach out to us.
Yeah,
And
we're just waiting for them to be ready.
when it's ready, when the time's ready, and we have all these different touch points, and we're going to know that they're ready and they're going to reach out to us. Well, that's all great if you're McKinsey and they're buying consulting services for an enterprise company, because what happens is when the buyer goes through the process of deciding to, A, we're going to do the job better, what technologies we're going to bring in, what companies we're going to talk to, it's always the top one or two in the industry. That's the only ones that count. And ironically, the first vendor that a buyer reaches out to is 78% most likely to get the sale. So if you're not that first reach out, you're not getting the sale. And if you're not if you're not McKinsey, you're not getting the sale either. So if you're a smaller, emerging growth fighter brand, you're not going to get that call. So you have to get involved in the early stage and mid stage of the buyer journey. You have to get involved before they're ready. You have to start to show that you care about that problem more than anyone else in the industry, that you have research insights that's deeper than anyone else, that you have identified performance gaps, and that you're really working hard to fill those performance gaps for them. And keep in mind, I've not mentioned any technology or any company in that scenario. So when you get asked to help a buyer bridge a performance gap, if you're smart, you'll say, you know what, this is how we can help you bridge it, but here are some other things that you might want to do, or some other companies that you might want to work with in addition to us, because there's two or three things that you guys could do. We can help you with this one, but we can also make an introduction to someone who can help you with that one. So don't be purely self-serving and say you only need one platform, it's us. We can do everything you need, and we're agile, whatever it is. And so try and take everything on the account, because what happens is you overpromise, and overcommit and underdeliver. So what I suggest to people is take a small, reasonable bite forward in the direction of bridging the gap. Take something that you know you can do well, overstaff it, overemphasize it, do it all. So your first step forward with that account is a great step, and it gives the buyer a sense of confidence to take another step. Too often, tech companies way overpromise and then they underdeliver. And so I think the opposite is a very small successful step, overstaffed, overreported, guarantee success. Even if it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense financially in the short term, if you think about that account over 5 years or 10 years, it's going to be well worth the effort if you can build that relationship and get in the door.
Well, that's the other thing I've seen is a increasingly short-sighted metrics, and I think it's coming out of this technology push of look at this dashboard, and you can see this neat little waterfall of leads, and then they're marketing qualified, whatever that means, and then they turn it into new business, and there's that neat little math problem. But this, what we're talking about here is establishing relationships with our best target buyers as early as possible. They're not going to convert, and that behavior of trying to force them to convert is going to ruin the relationship.
Yeah.
So I'd imagine there's some there's some therapy sessions that has to happen at the leadership level and the people that are demanding these results quickly.
Yeah, and I would say it's relationships come later. I would say you wanna share value. You want to share things the buyer is really cares about. So the relationship will come a little bit later. I think a lot of the problem is we try and establish the relationship up front. Now, in consulting and agencies, relationships are very important. But there's a company called, I think they're called Hinge Group, and they're an agency that helps service providers, so say accountants and those kind of people, do better marketing. But for 5 years, they've been doing a study on how high performance service companies, and it could be legal, could be financial, could be auditing, why are the top people growth wise, what are they doing differently? And they share that. So they're committed to do secondary, this is more secondary research, it's more data research, and they share those findings. So they're able to sit down with, let's say, Deloitte and say, here's the fastest growing auditing company in the United States. Here's how you stand versus them. Here's what they do in marketing that's much more successful than what you do. And that's very powerful. So ranking, rating, doing research gets you in the door. There's another company that's done an analysis. They're called Sail Through, and they did an analysis of the top 100 retailers in terms of advanced marketing personalization. They actually went out to the retailers' customers and did the research, and they came out with a research report. They got invited into every single company on that research report, and they got invited in not only at the CMO level, but because it was a ranking, it ended up being on 10Ks and ended up being a metric that these retailers tracked. They couldn't afford to do it themselves, or didn't know how to do it themselves, and they needed independence, and this company did it for them. So they became the lead analyst for their industry, but they also became the lead consultant to help these companies understand, what is my score? Why is my score so low? Why is this one score so high? And how do you bridge that gap? And those are the conversations that are really valuable conversations. Now, keep in mind, there isn't necessarily any relationship there. You don't even need a relationship there. The power of the value added that you're adding kind of knocks that out of the park. So you come to the table with a much higher level of credibility to begin with, and that actually enables the relationship to develop longer term. So I think people view relationships as very important when there's not a lot of product differentiation. So if you had, say, there's 5,000 advertising agencies that could do Google SEO. So which one am I going to go with? But there's always one or two that are killing it. And the question is, why are those people killing it? Is it that they're better at building relationships, or is it that their prowess and their data and their insights are 10 times better? So so start with that. Start with that. That's saying, if I put this asset or this campaign in front of a buyer, they're going to meet with me, even if they've never heard of us before, even if they don't know me. If you can get a meeting nearly outside of a relationship, then your marketing campaign is really powerful in Hunts.
It's the I know something you don't know.
Right, right. And the thing that's interesting is a lot of times people think buyers know more than they know. One of the programs that I do is an actual customer comparison. So we were working with one of my clients, and they were servicing Xfinity, and Xfinity had Xfinity signature support, and they were doing basically Geek Squad on the cloud for their SMB customers. And AT&T had a similar product, although AT&T had a very weak platform, and they tried to get into AT&T and T and sell them for 5 years. They couldn't get a meeting. So what we did was we say, let's show these two platforms in the eyes of these two brands from their customer's perspective. So we had 10 SMBs go through the Comcast experience, 10 SMBs go through the AT&T experience, and AT&T came out horrendous. And Comcast solved the problem in 41 minutes. AT&T took 14 hours, and the customer went wild. Now, when AT&T first saw that video, first off, they were annoyed that we had produced it. But when we apologized for producing it, and when we just said we'd destroy it and we wouldn't post it on social media, they met with us. So we had to really bring that perspective to light, and that purchasing person had no idea how bad their product was. And they thought their product was great. And their vendor was telling them all of this stuff about how people love us and they love you and all this stuff. So they were being fooled in terms of the quality of their product. So you have to do things. And when you're in a business like that, there's only 5 companies you want to sell to. There's Geek Squad, there's AT&T, Comcast, there's a few others, right? And when you're in a business that there's only 5 people going after, many businesses actually are like that. Retail's like that. And go after it with a much more sophisticated way. Don't hire somebody right out of college, who's going, "Hey man, can I get a demo? And did you see those Celtics?" That's you're dealing with a professional buyer. You've got to match them up with a. Now, if I were to give that strategy to any BDR, they would be more successful with it. And if we did the comparisons, let's say you're trying to sell into 5 companies, we did the comparison between all 5 companies in that case, and we gave it to the BDRs going after those prospects, they could really make hay with that. So leadership needs to step up on the sales and marketing side and to provide the BDRs with programs that hunt. They're not doing that today. Most of the times the BDRs that are successful, they actually use these methodologies, but they use it on their own. So they will call up Sephora in that example. They'll learn from Sephora, and they'll get into Target by leveraging that data. But the company could make it a hell of a lot easier for these reps to be successful and get more meetings. And there's a void of leadership, I would say, on this what I would call driving information exchange and value exchange between vendors and buyers.
Yeah. Michael, thank you. Mic drop. For those of you listening, it's Friday, but still, if you're binging on Beers with Max, don't operate any heavy machinery, tip your waitress. I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for